Manus Friedman makes a brilliant observation when discussing the power of the Jewish people. He says God doesn't have grandchildren. Every new generation of people are his children, not his grandchildren. They aren't once removed. They aren't his through you. They are yours through him. The point he's trying to make is that we are all his first. He's also pointing out that because we are his children and not his grandchildren, we are treated as such. Grandparents out there, take note. Friedman's treatise takes us to the topic of counting. As we read scripture, we find genealogy after genealogy. How many years did they live? How old were they when they had children? Who were the sons of Adam, Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth? Who were Lot's children? Both were born the result of incest, but one of them became the progenitor of King David and ultimately the Mashiach. Thanks to scripture, we know how many sons Jacob had. We know how many went down to Egypt and how many emerged into the desert led by Moses. We know how many Jews there were after the sin of the golden calf, how many died in the plague and how many survived. The book of Numbers is replete with one census after another and the numbers recorded by tribe. So what's the point? The point is that God counts. Counting is a sign of significance because when you are counting, everybody is one. We count votes after an election to determine who won. Everyone is equal when you are counting. Each one is significant. As a voting bloc, they are significant, perhaps. We count the young, the old, the men, the women, the blacks, Asians, Hispanics, and whites as blocks. But the individual votes are what really count. Each person is valued as an individual. In Judaism, there is also the power of the collective. 10 Jews equals a minyan. Certain prayers cannot be said unless a minyan is present. The Torah scrolls cannot be removed from the ark if you don't have a minyan. That's the power of the collective. But if even one of those Jews is not present, there is power in that as well. Each one is significant. The rabbi and the newly minted bar mitzvah boy of 13 are equal. Joe Rogan had Professor Evolutionary Behavioral Scientist and author Gad Saad on his podcast some years ago. In the course of their conversation, Saad asked Rogan if he knew how many Jews there were in the world. Now, Rogan's a pretty smart guy, well-read and all that. However, Joe missed the number by a mile. He started by saying there are 7 billion people in the world, so he began with an estimated 1 billion Jews. Saad's slight smirk might have tipped Rogan off, and he quickly downgraded his guess to something more conservative. Half that, he said. There are 500 million Jews in the world. Saad corrected him, saying there are between 13 and 15 million Jews in the world. Joe scoffed and said there were more than that in New York alone. There are more idiots in America than there are Jews, Rogan retorted. A quick search on the internet and Saad was proved right. The table produced from the Jewish Virtual Library said there are 14.2 million Jews in the world and nearly half reside in Israel. Another third live in the United States. The rest populate other nations. The value of the individual has been the cornerstone of the effort by Israel to have every last hostage, living or dead, returned. Even the bodies are significant because they are sacred to God. He counts them, and so we count them too. Counting comes up in the first few pages of the book, Man's Search for Meaning. Viktor Frankl describes the importance the Nazis placed on counting. When there was a transport to move a certain number of prisoners to another camp, usually to the gas chambers for the sick or feeble prisoners who were unable to work, there was a specific number that had to be in each transport. If someone died before the transport left, another man was chosen to go. Men jockeyed to make sure they were not part of the transport. Counting here was actually a sign of insignificance. Your documents and all possessions were taken upon arrival, so the doctor or professor was not differentiated from the common laborer. Their numbers were tattooed on their skin and sewn to a place on their clothing. Names were unimportant. In Lech Lecha, long before the birth of either Ishmael or Isaac, God told Abraham, "Look toward heaven and count the stars, if you are able to count them. So shall your offspring be." Genesis 15:5. In this week's Parsha, Vayera, after the binding of Isaac, God once again promised Abraham, "I will bestow my blessing upon you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars of heaven and the sands on the seashore." Genesis 22:17. The portion ends with God telling Abraham about 8 children who were born to Nahor and Milcah, Abraham's brother and sister-in-law. The last of the 8 was Bethuel, who is identified as the father of Rebekah. She would become Isaac's bride. Once again, God was counting and planning for the future. There is strength in numbers, but we must never forget that each individual is a necessary part of the collective that contributes to that strength. There's a lot of talk about being proud of who you are, and that's not a bad thing. It's psychologically healthy to be proud of who you are. In today's society, however, pride seems to be applied more to the collective than to the individual. I'm only proud because I belong to this or that identity group. So fractured are we that it's not even necessarily pride associated with your family, your blood relatives, only with those who look or think like you. The power of the individual is that you are significant to God on your own. And the mistake that man often makes is in thinking that the power is in large groups. The census tends to focus on the total. In the words of Rabbi Jonathan Sacks of blessed memory, any total tends to value the group or nation as a whole. The larger the total, the stronger the army, the more popular the team, and the more successful the company. But does that negate the individual? Rashi, in his commentary on Numbers 1:1, said, "Because they, the children of Israel, are dear to him, God counts them often. He counted them when they were about to leave Egypt. He counted them after the golden calf to establish how many were left. And now that he was about to cause his presence to rest on them with the inauguration of the sanctuary, he counted them again." Unfortunately, large groups tend to cause the individuals in the group to lose their sense of judgment. There are those who only, quote, "follow the crowd." That's why protests often devolve into riots as groupthink spreads through the individuals like a virus. It is a feature of Judaism that counting the individual has such great significance. The sages said that every life is like an entire universe, and they were right. A single person erased from this earth, gone too soon, is a potential family that would grow to outnumber the stars. And that was the strength of God's blessing on Abraham. The significance of the individual is why we must value each life, every person, as equal in God's sight. Jews were chosen not because they were better, but because God needed someone in this world to be a light for the nations, to help them understand who God was and is, and the importance of being counted as a member of his family. Again from Rabbi Sacks, we, the Jews, are not in the business of counting numbers. The Jewish people always was small and yet achieved great things. If you seek to lead, however small or large the group you lead, you must always communicate the value you place on everyone. That's the power, and therefore the significance of the individual. Never forget that. Whether you are part of a collective or not, remember who you are in God's eyes, counted as one of his children, a member of his family.